Hi, everyone. Happy Monday. It's Alan Schimmel here for Tech Strong Gang. We've got a lot to talk about today. Of course, the end of last week was a bit of a bumpy ride for our friends at Google Cloud. We've got some platform engineering news to talk about and more, but we've got a great gang of people to talk about it. Let me introduce you to them. First of all, for the first time, I think on the show with me is a friend of mine for many, many years. She is a multi-talented, faceted individual, Dr. Stacey Thayer. Stacey, it's so good to have you on here. It does my heart good to see you. How's everything?
Guys, I'm excited to be here. Thank you, Alan.
Excellent. Also new to our Tech Strong gang is Jack Gold. Jack, welcome. And, I don't know if you've had to tell people a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. It's good to be here. I'm a industry analyst, been an industry analyst for about 30 years or so, and covering a pretty wide range of stuff. Worked for some big firms for a while and decided about 20 years ago to go out on my own. So I've been doing that as an independent industry analyst for that period of time.
Fantastic. And welcome to the gang, Jack. Great to have you here. Our next guest she's been a gang member since day one. She is the Deploy Hub CEO, open source ambassador extraordinaire, the one and only Tracy Ragan. Hey, Tracy, how are you?
I'm doing great. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you all. And then last but not least, batting cleanup. He throws right-handed, bats left-handed, plays shortstop occasionally. He's up not near Poughkeepsie, but Harrison, New York. Our chief content officer, Mike Vizard.
And coming off a lovely Father's Day. So happy Father's Day to you too, Alan.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy Father's Day to all those dads out there and all people who stand in for dads too. There's a lot of people who aren't necessarily dads who take that dad role on, and thank you to all of them. Anyway, Mike, it was a busy weekend. It was a busy last week, and it'll probably be a busy this week. What are we kicking off with?
Yeah, it's starting around Thursday afternoon, East Coast time, I think. Google had an outage, and it started having this cascading effect. It even took off our websites at techstrong.com. We had a few of them down for a couple hours because it affected WordPress, and all kinds of organizations were reporting issues. And Jack, we're now here on Monday and we're talking about hindsight, but I want to start with you on this. Do we still have these kind of single points of failure? I thought we were better than this at this point.
Well, we'd like to think we were better than this at this point. The fact is that we're not. One of the issues that people fail to understand is that even though you personally may not be a direct client of Google Cloud, a lot of the infrastructure that you use is a client of Google Cloud. So that if Google Cloud goes down, even though you're not using, Google Meets or whatever you think you're using, if you're using Spotify, if you're using Cloudflare, if you're using a bunch of other stuff that's powered by the components of Google Cloud, you're going to feel that effect. And so that's really what happened here. It was an escalating problem that started at Google Cloud, but then quickly spun out to all of the other people that use Google Cloud services for things like identity, for instance, that then brought down all of these services that people are used to that don't say Google Cloud on them. So this is not unique to Google Cloud. It's going to be unique to any of the services, the cloud services we use that are built upon other infrastructure, kind of invisible to us as end users. It just happened to be Google Cloud at this point, but it's been Azure in the past. It could be AWS. It could be almost anything.
Even Oracle. So Mike, I got a few things to add. First of all, probably if you're going to techstrong.com, it's not going to work for you anyway. That's not our website. It's techstronggroup.com. But, and Jack, we're one of those companies that, though we don't directly pay Google Cloud for our hosting, our specialized host provider actually uses the Google Cloud native format, and so it affected us. But Mike, I don't buy everything Google gave as a timeline here, because we had a problem with StreamYard on Friday morning's Tech Strong Gang. which was recorded Thursday morning at about 10 o'clock in the morning. And it was already, StreamYard was already being affected. And it was pretty much down most of the afternoon because of this Google Cloud thing. On top of that, Cloudflare had some real issues. Now, Cloudflare, of course, is, I don't know, 26% of the internet goes through Cloudflare or something like that. But I didn't realize they were that dependent on a single cloud provider, namely Google here. I don't know if the Cloudflare incident is separate and apart. Seems too coincidental, but I think that contributed to the overall malaise of all these sites, was cascading pretty badly.
It's a domino effect, Alan, right? Once one domino falls at the Google site, it's just a whole series of other dominoes that are dependent on that first domino. And whether it's Cloudflare or whether it's others, whether, again, Spotify, pick your favorite. How many sites use CAPTCHA? That's a Google service. So it's really an issue about interdependence that we don't see. It's all invisible behind the scenes, but it's really there.
Tracy, is this bad engineering or is this just unavoidable nature of the thing?
Well, I think it's a reflection of how important API management systems are, right? This was, I think they changed some kind of a quota in their API management system that brought it down. What a simple update to create a massive outage. So we have talked in previous gang discussions, we've talked about APIs, and we used to talk more about them, and I think we've forgotten about them somewhat. So this is a reminder how important those API management systems are. And it even goes further than that because we still have issues with API security. This was simply, it looks like literally a change that kind of like when all the Microsoft servers went down because somebody updated something that changed a parameter that gave everybody the screen of death, right? The tombstone. But yeah, APIs are important, and these management systems have to be treated with some care.
Mm-hmm. Stacey, explain the psychology of this to me a little bit, because every time there's one of these incidents, everybody stands around and says, well, that's a wake-up call for sure. And then about 24 hours later, everybody rolls over and hits the snooze button and forgets about it. Is there some flaw in our souls as IT people that we can't quite wrap our heads around the fact that the cloud is a single point of failure, or are we living under some sort of delusion?
I mean, I think it's a matter of, well, how bad was it? All right, what did that? How bad was the pain? How bad was the hurt? For the company that I work for, it was okay. We couldn't get into a couple of Google Meets, or so what did we have to do? How is there something that we couldn't get around? And I think for most people, okay, it was a couple of hours, and then we go on. Now, if it started happening more and more, if the failure was more painful, then I think people start trying to make change, but people are so reluctant to make change, to try and get backup systems, to try and diversify, that it's just much easier to put all their eggs in one basket because you think it's Google. They know what they're doing. They're never going to let us down, or whether it's something or Microsoft or something else, and you've chosen and that's who you stick with. But that to me just shows the flaw in that kind of planning, that when you put all your eggs in one basket, or when you rely on something so heavily, or ignore it, or just put your head in the sand and say, it wasn't so bad, that we just go with sometimes the path of least resistance, even if we shouldn't.
I'm trying to assess the total cost of this thing, and somebody will, of course, naturally throw around numbers with B's in it. But to Stacey's point, so I couldn't log into WordPress and I couldn't load a story for an extra day. What did that really cost? Versus what did it really cost somebody like Spotify that maybe has a business model that's based totally on Google Cloud, and maybe they should be a little more aggressive about single points of failure than we need to be necessarily. But Alan, what's your take on the math here?
This is like talking about ROIs of security. Right. I never believed in them, even though I sat and did these ROI calculators that we gave to the sales team to use. I mean, look, you take your best guess basically, and and it's more subjective than objective. You if Spotify generates X amount of dollars an hour and they were down 2.5 hours, that's 2.5x, right? And then you want to carry that across. But at the end of the day, no one's looking for an exact amount, right? They want a ballpark number, usually a big number that does end with a B. But if you look at things like, over the years, we've all read the Verizon data breach report and some of the other security reports. They'll tell you that network downtime roughly equates to YZ amount of dollars per hour. And you could use that as a starting point. I don't think you could ever get your thumb on a much tighter number than that. But suffice to say, it's a big number. It's a major pain in the butt, even for us, because, all of our sites, it wasn't just a few, all of our sites were down for a decent amount of time. That it's hard to put a real number on it, but it definitely cost us significant money.
What might be interesting, just to build on that a little bit, Alan, from a cost perspective, is if some of these folks that are so dependent on Google decide to go sue them. I could see that happening with. There are a lot of lawyers in the.
I don't think that. Look, is America? Anyone could sue anyone, right? But mostly, if you're a Google customer, they have SLAs in there, and even with a 5.9 SLA, that's still a certain amount of time down a month. And if you sue them, and if you read the fine print of your SLA, what you're entitled to is Google was down for 2.5 hours. 2.5 hours is about 150th of your monthly bill to Google. So they're going to refund you $2.53. Very sorry. Doesn't make up what your real losses are.
Yeah, I don't disagree, but we're probably going to see some of that stuff anyway, just because.
I mean, look, you saw this, right? Delta. Remember, Delta sued CrowdStrike over the outage last year.
Yeah. So the thing about it is when I see things like this happen, when these come up, and Google's done great. They have. I mean, I don't know if they've ever had this kind of press in the last, 5-10 years. They're actually a pretty consistent company to be relying on. But what if this is critical infrastructure? We're talking about, you might not have been able to get to a website, or you might not have been able to hold a Google Meet. That's not necessarily, as Stacey pointed out, super critical. But what if this was our electrical grid?
Or a hospital?
Yeah, exactly. So what can we learn from this to prevent critical infrastructure from having similar problems? I think that's really the conversation that we should be having.
Not all outages are created equal, and not all networks are created equal.
But what we learned, Alan, was the dependency across these systems.
Oh, absolutely. But there's a different mathematics involved when you're talking critical infrastructure, right? Over the years, I used to do some work when I was at Still Secure. We used to work with the good folks over at NERC and FERC. I don't know if you guys know NERC and FERC. Those are the people who are responsible for running our nuclear energy plants. And I will tell you, they have real failovers and plan Bs and options, right? You should, if it's truly mission critical, you've got to have contingency plans for when stuff hits the fan. And I think you do have that in a lot of these mission critical. I frankly was surprised, and I'm not banging them in particular, but I was very frustrated with StreamYard yesterday, right? We had live events going on that I had to stream. That was pretty mission critical to my business. And the fact that they're solely dependent, it seems, on Google Cloud. And because Google Cloud was down, my streaming ability was nil.
There's another piece to this as well. I don't disagree with anything you just said, Alan, about backups and having secondary infrastructure that you can rely on. And by the way, I would imagine Google and Microsoft and AWS have that as well. But one of the pieces that is apparent to me is that at the end of the day, someone screwed up. This was probably a human error. We don't have yet all of the details, but it's very likely that someone hit something or hit a button or they shouldn't have. The CrowdStrike example that you gave earlier, it was a human failing. And so no matter how good our systems get or can be, we still have to deal with humans. And the humans getting in there and messing something up is a real problem that I don't know how you fix. We let AI run everything, I guess, but that doesn't work either.
Before we end this conversation, I do want to call out one thing. There is an organization that benefited handsomely from all this. It's called Starbucks, and there was more people in Starbucks yesterday than any other day recently because, well, they couldn't log in.
Well, but even if you're at Starbucks, you couldn't get on StreamYard. You still had your Cloudflare. I'll tell you two organizations that benefited from it yesterday. One's called AWS and one's called Microsoft Azure, because that's how people act, right? Oh, they're down. I'm moving my stuff to AWS, or I'm not using Google Cloud anymore.
Yeah, we went to Zoom, right? Yeah.
You know how that goes. But as Jack said in the beginning, let he without sin throw the first rock into the glass house.
I thought the other thing in some of the articles that I read when I dug down, I said that the way they fixed it was they bypassed the changes that they had made. Instead of correcting the changes, they kind of did an emergency fix. And reading the article, the whole thing said to me, why don't they have test environments? Well, how did this happen? Internally, something really got whacked out. Let's just say it got whacked out. Because normally you would have changed these, you would have updated this API management system in a different arena before you pushed it out to the entire world. So it was a kind of a weird one when I was reading what caused it, because it was, I don't know what they could have changed. I have no idea. Maybe they changed, how much data could be pushed through. Who knows what they updated? But how did you break that, right? How did that happen?
Human error.
Yeah, human error.
I guess it's thank God for load balancers, right? Because we could shift things around.
But what did they do? Like bring down the number of concurrent connections or something? I mean,
yeah. I mean, I'm not saying they're lying. I just think there's more to the story.
Oh, thank you, Alan. That's probably what I was alluding to.
Yep. We got to take a break. We're going to jump onto our B block in a second. You're watching Tech Strong Gang.